So last week we sort of broke in a bad place in one sense because we finished a little earlier than I thought on another section. So we are in the content of Proverbs. This is week 3 of our study of Proverbs. Whether or not we finish this in 4 weeks will depend on today, but we will not finish it next week because, Lord willing, next week Brother Chuck Bartlett is up here, and he will be taking the class for us next week. So if we do finish Proverbs, it will be in 2 weeks. But let's see what we can get through today. And if there are any comments, do bring them up. They are welcome. But we are in the content, and we're talking about the 3 types of wisdom. And I mentioned last week that we have one word for wisdom, and it encompasses all of the aspects of wisdom when it comes to everything we think about. In Hebrew, though, there are different words, 3 different words for wisdom, and they, even though they come along and they sound in English like they're pretty similar, and they are, the Hebrews would have understood them slightly differently. And so us understanding that there are slightly different shades of these words in different contexts is important. So the first word we talked about was hakma. It is the proper grasp of the basic issues of life and the relationship of God to man. In other words, it is the proper discernment of right and wrong, or good and evil. And its application of what one knows to the tasks that one must accomplish. And that's what we talked about last week. We're going to go through the other 2, and then we're going to find some verses that would contain these words so we can see them in the context of how they're used in Proverbs. The second word is the Hebrew word bina, or bina. It depends on how it's pronounced. And this is often translated as understanding. This has the ability to discern truth and error. Not just good and evil, but truth and error. What God's word says versus what God's word doesn't say. Yes, we think, well, that's the same thing, and in some instances it is, but the difference between good and evil doesn't always have to do with the difference between what's truth and what's error in the different shades of how the Hebrews are considering this. A lot of the time, it's a consideration between the passing pleasures of sin and the enduring goals of godliness. That's this second word. That's bina. And the third word is tusia, T-U-S-I-Y-Y-A. It'll be up on the screen in a second. And this is translated as sound wisdom or wise judgment. There is wisdom, and there is wisdom. Remember, there's man's wisdom and God's wisdom, so we do know that there is different kinds of wisdom. There is sound wisdom. In other words, that would be the wisdom that comes from God. Sound meaning what? When we say sound wisdom. Solid wisdom, that's a good word. Solid wisdom. Wise judgment. There are different types of judgment. Not all judgments are wise. And it emphasizes the ability of man to take instruction that God has revealed and apply it to our lives. So in other words, it's not only reading what we read in Scripture, it's being able to take what we read, recognize it's from God, and apply it in our lives. Those are the 3 words. And which brings us to Dave's question, which was, which of these 3 types of wisdom is emphasized in the following passages of Proverbs? And I've made this question slightly easier, like I did last time in Psalms, and created my own bubble. This is in addition to Dave's chart. Has our 3 types that we just discussed. I put a little blurb as to what they are, and then our 3 passages. And so the first one we're going to look at is Proverbs chapter 9 and verse 6. We're going to start up at the front with Jeff. Jeff, why don't you get Proverbs chapter 9 and verse 6? And as we read it, think about which of these 3 types of wisdom is under consideration here.
Forsake foolishness and live, and go on the way of understanding.
Okay. Now, if you were listening closely to one of the 3 words, which word is that? It's B. It's bina. Because I remember I had said that it often is translated as understanding. This is the bina type of wisdom. Forsake the foolish and live, and go in the way of understanding. We translate this, yes, as understanding, but this is wisdom. Go in the way of understanding. How do we do that? Listening to God. It's exactly how we do that. We forsake the foolish. Why would forsake the foolish cause us to live? We'll get into fools a little later, but why is forsaking the foolish cause us to live?
Because usually foolishness leads to sin.
Usually foolishness leads to sin. That's exactly right. And so if we forsake the foolish, we forsake the sinful, we will live in the sight of God because we will not participate in sin and we will be saved. That's good. So that gets us now to Proverbs 2, verses 10 to 13. Gloria, you want to get Proverbs 2, verses 10 through 13.
When wisdom enters your heart, the knowledge is pleasant to the soul. Discretion will preserve you. Understanding will keep you, to deliver you from the way of evil. For the man who speaks perverse things, from those who leads the paths of righteousness, to walk in the ways of darkness.
Okay, now it's not Bina. Like I said, I've not put two words up there. So Bina is gone. Of A or C, of Hakma or Tusia, which do we believe it is? And Gord has said it's A. Let's see. Yes, it is A. The proper discernment between good and evil. We have wisdom in that verse. We have knowledge in that verse. We have understanding in that verse. But to deliver thee from the way of the evil man, from the man that speaks perverse things. So it's, again, the discernment between good and evil. And lastly, of course, it's not going to hide what we're talking about because there's only one left. But Proverbs 2, verses 6 to 9. Henry, do you want to get Proverbs 2, verses 6 to 9?
For the Lord gave wisdom, from his laws come knowledge and understanding. And he spoke of sound wisdom for the upright, and these are stewards to those who walk upright. He guards the path of justice, and preserves the way of the saints. They will understand righteousness and justice, equity and holiness.
Okay, so the last one, obviously, is the ability to apply wisdom. The Lord gives wisdom. He lays up sound wisdom for the righteous. He keeps the paths of judgments, preserves the way of the saints. Then you will understand righteousness and judgment. Just understanding, we think, well, that's just to know. Understanding is more than that. If we truly understand something, we will be able to apply it. In school, kids are often asked, "Do you understand what was just taught?" And kids will most likely go, "Yes, I understand." They'll answer yes to that question, even if they don't a lot of the times. But we truly know someone understands something is if we take what they've learned and sort of change the scenario a little bit and to see if they can take what they've learned and take it to the next step. It's one thing to know what is written on the page. It's another thing to be able to apply what is written onto the page in another situation. And we see that oftentimes. The sermon will be dealing with this morning. Speaking where God has not spoken, the phrase often is, "But God didn't forbid it." And a lot of the time that's true. We don't come along and see, "Well, thou shalt not dance." We don't see that. First of all, not all dancing is wrong. That's why we don't read that, for one thing. Not all dancing is wrong. A lot of today's dancing is because it's lascivious. But not all dancing is wrong. The way we can understand right versus wrong is by going to the scriptures and taking what we've seen in one verse and applying it to a situation that maybe is not talked about specifically. When we read about lasciviousness, in other words, lustfulness, improper lusting, we read of that verse and we can understand maybe what that verse is saying. Well, we shouldn't lust, and we usually apply it to relationships between men and women. Or we can't lust after a woman, or we can't lust after a man. But then we come along and there's a situation where lasciviousness may not be so, what I call, upfront about it. Like as far as it's not always clear. And we have to take the knowledge, okay, lasciviousness is wrong. Why is many types of dance today wrong? Because it causes lasciviousness in the way people dress, in the way people move, in the way people touch each other. And the Bible doesn't condemn, thou shalt not do these types of dances. But if we understand wisdom, if we understand God's teaching, we can take what the principles in Scriptures are and apply it in other areas of our lives that maybe the Scriptures aren't as explicit on. That's what true wisdom is, the ability to apply wisdom. Take what God has said and apply it to our lives. Any comments on this section, on the three types of wisdom? If not, that brings us to the next part of the content, which is the personification of wisdom. What is personification? That's a bigger word. What does that mean? English class, going back to English. The literary types or whatever it is in English class. Personification, Jeff.
To take the term of wisdom and give it a personality.
Yeah. Wisdom is an inanimate object or an idea. It's not really an object. It's an idea. It's not a person. Wisdom is not a person. But when we give wisdom attributes of a person, that's a literary device, that's the word I was looking for, called personification. We have made something that's not a person and given it personal attributes, like we would talk about people. And so, in the book of Proverbs, if you've read it, wisdom is personified as a lady, to whom all should listen and render obedience. Ladies should like that. Like as far as a lot of people today, ladies women are downtrodden in the Bible. Wisdom is not personified as a man who we should listen to and obey. No, it's a lady who we should listen to and render obedience. Wisdom is seen as taking a highly visible position from which to cry out to man. In other words, wisdom is crying out to us. Listen to me. Follow me. And that's something we need to actually heed. We need to listen to God's wisdom. Let's get a couple verses on that. I think we're to Cherry. Proverbs 8, verses 1 to 4. Keep your finger in Proverbs 8. We're going to be going through a lot of Proverbs 8 in the next little bit. So Proverbs 8, Cherry's going to get to us. How about Cherry get 1 and 2, and Shudung 3 and 4.
She cries out by repeats, at the entrance of the city, at the entrance of the doors. To you, the mind and all and my words, this is the song of mine.
So, we have wisdom here. You get the picture. Does wisdom not cry? That's personification. Wisdom doesn't literally cry. What type of crying is this? Just so we understand what type of crying we're talking about. Jeff?
It would be a loud speaking out.
Loud speaking out. We think of crying including tears. Intense crying would include a lot of noise, people would notice. But it's not always tears that we're talking about. It's a cry. Loud speaking out. And understanding put forth her voice. In other words, it's again, wisdom is talking here. She stands in the top of the high places. In other words, wisdom is visible. And by the way, in the places of past, she cries out at the gates. Remember, the gates are where the people go for judgment. The king would sit at the gates and judge the people. and at the coming in at the doors. Unto you, O men, I call, and my voice is to the sons of man. In other words, wisdom is crying out to man, taking a very highly visible position. Wisdom is not hiding in the shadows, around the corner. God's wisdom is out in front of us and is crying out to us. Wisdom attempts to convince the foolish ones that only she speaks what is true and right. The fools today think that they are speaking truth. They are speaking righteousness. Wisdom is crying out and saying, no, I'm the only ones doing that. Sandra, do you want to get verses 5 to 9 of Proverbs 8?
Simple, understand wisdom, and ye fools, be ye of an understanding heart. Hear, for I will speak of excellent things, and the opening of my lips shall be right things. For my mouth shall speak truth, and wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are in righteousness, there is nothing forward or perverse in them.
One more verse.
They are all plain to him that understandeth, and right to them that find knowledge.
So verse 5, O ye simple, understand wisdom. In other words, understand it. Wisdom is understandable. It's not far above us. God's wisdom, when he reveals it to us, we can understand. We can take what we know and apply it. But he said, O fools, also be of an understanding heart. Fools can even understand. We'll deal more with fools a little later, so I'll leave the fool part for a little later. But, verse 6, here I will speak excellent things. What is this verse saying? Excellent things. You think of the word excellent meaning, oh, good. What is excellent things here? Pardon me?
Noble.
Noble things. That's a good word. Anything else? Amazing things. Like as far as noble, amazing, all good words. Excellent things. These are things to aspire to. These are not just what we might call good things. Excellent. Usually we think of excellent as really good. Okay, let's take it really good if we want to talk about that today. Excellent. Not just minor things. These are excellent things. The opening of my lips shall be right things, not wrong things, because truth comes out of wisdom's mouth, not wickedness, because wickedness is an abomination. All the words are righteousness. We want to know what's righteous? Seek after wisdom, God's wisdom. That's what's righteous, not perverse. Perverse things don't come from God. Perverse things come from the devil and from man. And verse 9, they are plain to him who understands. They're obvious. They're simple to him who understands. And right to them who find knowledge. In other words, people who find wisdom, who find knowledge properly, aren't kicking against the wisdom and knowledge. They're right to them. They obey them because they recognize that God is righteous here, that it is the right thing to do. Any comments before we move on? Bill?
One writer, thinking of the personifying it, he uses it as a companion. If you're picturing her as a lady, I mean, a companion is something we desire.
Yeah.
It's something we listen to. Right? It just touches, on our thinking side.
Yeah. Like I said,
That sounds interesting.
yeah, men and women, what are they to each other if they're married? They're companions for one another. They help one another. Wisdom is out to help us. Wisdom's not out to confine us. God's wisdom, yeah, we might come along and say, well, it confines what I do, and it does. But it's really there to protect us and to lead us in the paths of righteousness. It makes our lives better. We think of sin as pleasurable, and for a moment, it is. Let's not deceive ourselves in thinking, well, sin's just not pleasurable. It is, for a moment. And then we have the consequences we face from it. Forget the spiritual consequences, which are great. Let's not minimize them, and that's not what I'm trying to do. But there are physical consequences to different types of sin. Gambling, we face physical consequences all the time if we do that. Adultery and fornication break homes. Different diseases come from different types of sin. All of these different physical consequences. It's pleasurable for a moment, but not for a lifetime. And so wisdom is a companion. Let's see God's wisdom as a companion to us to lead us in the paths of righteousness. Verses 10 and 11 of Proverbs 8, wisdom here insists that what she has to offer is more valuable than earthly treasures. I think we're to Kala, verses 10 and 11.
Take my instruction and not silver, and knowledge rather than choicest gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all desirable things cannot compare with her.
So, wisdom here is being described as very valuable. It should have value to us. It's not something we should toss in our glove compartment of our car or in the corner of all the pile of stuff that we might have. No, it needs to take the most important part of our lives, the precious part. We take those things that are valuable to us and we put them in a high place. We put them in a place maybe that's safe. And it's better than silver. Knowledge is better than gold. And wisdom is better than rubies or jewels, as Kala's version says. They are to be desired. There's a song. God, the law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. And it goes through, and in the chorus says, more to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. That's Psalms 19, by the way. Same idea here. God's wisdom is valuable. She is valuable than all the earthly treasures that we can have. Why? Why is that? Why is wisdom more valuable than all of these things?
Because it lasts. It lasts. The other things, they perish.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Wisdom lasts. Wisdom is there when we lose those things. Wisdom, if the scriptures aren't lost, we always have the ability to have wisdom. We might lose the other things. They'll perish. They might be stolen. They might be lost. They might be burned up. If say we have a house fire, it might be burned up. Wisdom's here. It's better than all of these things. It's higher than all of these things. The next point goes to maybe close to what Bill was talking about. Wisdom is so closely connected with the work of God that she is presented, well, I guess the latter part not. It's closely connected with the work of God that she is presented as having been with him at creation as the master craftsman. In other words, Genesis 1, when God created the heavens and the earth, he showed us his wisdom in all that he did, and wisdom was in the world right from the very beginning. Let's get verses 22 to 31. Why don't we read 2 verses each? We'll start with Gord and move to Bill and around. So Proverbs 8, verses 22 to 31.
The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way, before his works of old. I have been established from everlasting, from the beginning, but there was ever and ever.
When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills, I was brought forth.
Before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world, when he established the heavens, I was there, and he drew a circle on the face of the deep.
When he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limit, so that the waters would not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth.
When I was beside him as a master craftsman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him.
One more verse.
Rejoicing in his inhabited world. And my delight was with the sons of men.
So, verse 22, the Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way. In other words, wisdom was always there from the beginning of this universe. Wisdom was there before. We don't know what, we can't comprehend. It's beyond us to comprehend what eternity was like before this universe. Science can't figure that out. What was before? They are grappling with that, trying to come up with a way to get rid of God. That's what they're trying to do, is to come up with an explanation that can get rid of God, but even they can't do that. Because they cannot see. Science, by its very nature, has to be observed. They cannot observe the unobservable. And before this universe, though, wisdom was there. The wisdom was set up from everlasting, from the beginning. Before the earth was. When there were no depths of the sea or land. Before there were mountains and hills. And before there were fields. Before there was even dust on the earth. No man was here. Wisdom was before. And I note here something you might miss in passing. Verse 27. People want to come along and say, well, the Bible taught the earth was flat. And they taught that the earth was flat, and that's where the Bible was wrong. Now, I'm not going to deny many people who, maybe religious people, thought the earth was flat. I'm not going to deny that, and that may have been the Catholic position for a long time. This verse doesn't tell you that. I mean, what's your verse? You read that. Read verse 27 again.
When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep.
When he drew the circle, or the compass, the King James Version would have, gives us the image of the earth not being flat, but round. God established the earth. He made the earth. He didn't make it flat. We can't fly off the end of the earth. It's a round sphere, just like we saw when the astronauts went up into the heavens in the 1960s. And we see it today because they're up there now. But we saw pictures to show that. To show the massive wonders of creation. And everything, this is a good chapter when we want to talk about the fountains of the deep. The oceans. They don't generally, like we have the tides come in, but they don't engulf the land. They have divisions. Why do they have divisions? Well, scientifically we can say, well, if you go out into the ocean, a little ways past the continental shelf, it drops off. There's a big barrier. If you were to drain the oceans, you would find we're actually living on a big mountain. The land is above the ocean. Now, we have taller mountains that are above land even higher. But you would find it's like a big bowl where the oceans sit. Foundations of the earth. God made those so that the waters don't come across the lands. Remember, he opened the fountains of the deep when the flood came. But he gave them boundaries. He said, this is an account of creation in this, and wisdom is being described here as being there, even when God did this. And then wisdom is essential. It's being described in verses 32 to 36 as essential to the spiritual life and to man's well-being. I think we're to Tim. You want to get Proverbs 8, verses 32 to 36.
Now therefore listen to me, my children. How blessed are those who keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise, yet do not disdain it.
Till the end of the chapter.
Blessed is the man who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at the post of my door. For whoever finds me finds life, and obtain favor from the Lord. But he who sins against me wrongs his own soul, and those who hate me after.
Okay, so wisdom here is being seen as something that is essential to our spiritual lives. We cannot be spiritual in the eyes of God and not heed his wisdom and not heed his knowledge. Hear instructions and be wise, refuse it not. It's not only necessary for our spiritual life, but it's also for our well-being. Blessed is the man who hears me. Well off is the man who hears me. Now, I'm not talking about physical wealth here, but we're blessed if we hear the wisdom of God. All spiritual blessings are in Christ. None of them are out of Christ. So wisdom is essential to our spiritual life. It's important that we recognize this. And finally, wisdom invites those who lack understanding to feast on that which she provides, so that they may no longer be fools. If we do not heed God's wisdom, we are fools. And we deserve to be treated like fools by God. Let's get the first 6 verses of the next chapter, of chapter 9. We'll start with Henry. Why don't we read 2 verses each, 1 through 6. Of chapter 9, yes.
Wisdom has built her house, and he has hewn out his 7 pillars, and she has slaughtered her meat, and she has mixed her wine. She has also furnished her people.
She has sent out her sheep offer the prayers for meat of the city. Let all who are sinful come and see. She said to those who made judgment.
Pardon is of my words, and the drink of the one who commits foresee foolishness and men, and the those who do have understanding.
So after all of this, after all of chapter 6, we get into chapter 9, after all of chapter 8, we get into chapter 9, and wisdom, after laying out the case for her being righteous and her being truthful and her being there from the beginning, says, come listen to me. Come feast on what I have for you to feast on. In other words, it's not just a little nibble that we need, just a snack. It's a feast that's described here. Something to eat until we were full. It's a feast. Drink of the wine that I have made. That is righteousness. Forsake the foolish and live, and go in the way of understanding. That's how wisdom is described. Wisdom is personified this way. Do we have any comments before we move on? Jeff, and then Bill.
Reminds me at this point, we can understand better now. Solomon seems to be the tough one to understand. He was blessed with wisdom above all others. Mm-hmm. And yet, what happened to him, if you look at it, it's difficult to understand why Solomon had wisdom above everyone.
Yeah.
But then when we break it down here, we see the 3 types of wisdom, the personification of wisdom, and understand the somewhat complexity of wisdom,
mm-hmm.
although it's not that complex that we can't understand it. But we can better understand than how Solomon failed. Because it's one thing to be blessed with wisdom, another thing apparently to use it properly, to add all those particular things you need to add.
To know wisdom and to know wisdom. Like
Right.
as far as you can know what is wise. Solomon knew what is wise, but he didn't apply what was wise. That was that last type of wisdom. That last word. He knew it, and he knew better. We come along and say, well, you should have known better. And let's be careful when we say he should have known better. We should know better. Let's not come along and point the fingers in other people's wrong. Well, they should know better, and not point the finger at us. We should know better. But sometimes we don't either. Solomon is an example of a man with great wisdom, and yet he's foolish. He would be described as these fools that we'll talk about, not today, the Lord willing, in a couple weeks. Bill.
Just in that Proverbs 8 jumped out at me. I see God's love there. we know that God's wisdom outmatches ours. We learn our wisdom through mistakes and stuff like that. But it just dawned on me here, God prepared a wisdom for us before he even made us.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like to us as Christians, to others that should teach us, but to us as Christians, that should show us how much God really loved his creation. That he, all the things and traps that we were going to fall into, he prepared all the ways out.
The ways out. That's good. That's good. That's a good point. We think, well, God loved us. He created this earth for us and all that's in it. He created the ways to get out of our problems before he created us. He foresaw the pitfalls that we would face. We still are at fault when we face them, or if we've sinned when we face them. But God has saw all that and prepared a way out, and prepared a better way. That's a good point. We won't get through this, but we're going to introduce it for a couple weeks. Practical instruction. This is what the book of Proverbs is mainly known for. Very practical instruction. These other two things that we were talking about, that's a more what I call an academic look at Proverbs. This is what many people go to the book of Proverbs for. They don't see the academics. Maybe in English you don't see the three types. You might understand the personification of wisdom, but that's a more symbolic thing. That's a more abstract thing. Practical instruction is here in the book of Proverbs, and it's exceptionally practical for today. You see the problems that we face today, and you come along and say, if only we would heed God's wisdom, maybe we wouldn't be facing all of the problems that we face today, with alcohol, and drugs, and marriage, and parents or children not obeying their parents. All found here. All practical instructions of how God wants us to live, and then we can sort of see how we live. Do we measure up to how God wants us to live? And its truths span the course of time and still remain true today. And so we're going to start Dave's question, or at least I'm going to introduce it. We're probably not going to start into it, but I'm going to introduce the question for you to think about for a couple weeks. And these are the passages that we're going to look at, these 6. And they're each going to teach us about a different area of our life that God has prepared, as Bill was saying earlier, for us to live. We're going to look at Proverbs 5 and Proverbs 23, Proverbs 1, Proverbs 11, Proverbs 22, and Proverbs 3. We've read some of these before, but we'll read them again. We have really 3 sections left. We have this section. We won't spend a ton of time examining each verse so closely. We have our section on fools, and then we have an added section. I added a section. Dave mentioned it in the book. I think it was 2 sentences in the book, or 1 sentence in the book, and that's the last chapter of Proverbs, the virtuous woman. I believe the virtuous woman is important enough for us to take an extended look at.